Oh, I thought today I would tell you a little bit about the farm that I grew up on. Our farm was, in fact, if you want to look, you can see our farm on Google Earth. It was 2660 New Road. Well, 2660 New Road. That was the last house that I lived in there. It was a home that my father built. I helped some. I wasn't much, but I did the best I could. I was just an early teenager, and anyhow, he built a new home for us there, and he was quite a craftsman. Very specific about the way he did things. In fact, there'll be more about that in here. But anyhow, my father had a dream, and his dream was to have a farm and vegetable farm, etc. A working farm. And anyhow, he had purchased the place, and we moved. I briefly lived in Sanborn, and then we moved to Ransomville, and that's where I grew up. But anyhow, the farm was my father's dream, and I was happy to this day that he had a dream. Growing up there, I thought I was such a hick, and I was jealous of my cousin that lived in Niagara Falls because he could walk to go to see a movie and stuff. I thought I was such a hick, and so I spent the majority of my life, not the majority of my life, but a whole bunch of my life, just waiting to get off the farm. I wanted off the farm. I don't know why, but I did. Today I realized, I spent the rest of my life basically trying to get back to the farm. Anyhow, it was a dream that my parents had, and to this day I thank God that my folks had that dream. What a life. I mean, I had a life, and I was not a good boy by any means. There's a lot of people can testify to that. I did some bad things and whatnot, but anyhow, our farm, it was not a large farm by any means. If you look at Google Earth at 2660 New Road, you'll see it. It's a little bit difficult to make out the boundaries of it now. The back of the farm was bordered by the New York Central Railroad, and to the east of us was the Mattoon Farm and the Weepert Farm, and to the west of us there was nothing till you got to Curtis Avenue. No homes, there was nothing. St. Christopher Lane and all that was not there. That came later on in life. But anyhow, it was not, the farm was not a big farm by any means, but being in upstate New York, everything grew fast there in the summertime, including weeds, and boy, we had a lot of them. But anyhow, at the back of our farm also was the cold storage pond, and that was on the southwest corner of the farm was the cold storage pond. And growing up in my day, the cold storage pond, that was our internet. That was our PlayStation, the Xbox, and all of those things. None of that was around. So we did all our stuff outside. And in the wintertime, it was the same way. It was a hockey rink and all that kind of good stuff. But we grew everything there, all kinds of vegetables. We had pear trees, apple trees, peaches, you name it, we had it. The big money crop though was grapes, the Concord grapes, and boy, we had tons of them, tons and tons of Concord grapes. In the early days, we contracted with Welch's grape juice company over in Newfane, and then when they went out of business, then we contracted with Shadowgate Winery. And so anyhow, we always had a buyer for our crops, and I remember they were pretty tasty. Anyhow, and also, of course, on the farm, we had a big red barn. I mean, it was a big barn. And that barn is gone today, but in my day, that was really a fun place. Gosh, upstairs was the hay loft where we stored hay for the cows. We always had a couple cows, a couple pigs, stuff like that. But anyhow, and of course, I have to tell you that the barn, that was also the first place that I had a close encounter with a girl. Don't get all excited. We were so young. We were both interested in each other, but we didn't know what to do. Our lives were changing, that's for sure. Coming of age, you know, the deal. But anyhow, as promised, her name remains locked forever. So anyhow, that was a big deal. And the hayloft, of course, it had a big white sliding door on the top, and it said Poplar Farm, because our farm had 3 of the largest poplar trees I've ever seen in my life. Never seen one bigger. They were huge. But you can tell those trees were pretty heavy trees too, because they had a lot of 22 pellets in them. Yeah, you did a lot of target practice out there. And so anyhow, the barn, of course, we cleaned out the hayloft eventually when I got to be early teenager, and that was our basketball court. And in the wintertime, it was always a crowd of kids up there playing basketball. Man, it was a great time. Great time. And let's see, I got to tell the other stuff here. Of course, also on the farm, that's where I learned to drive. And I don't know how old I was, but I was real small, and I learned how to drive a Farmall Super A tractor. That tractor's still around today. I think Peter Baker owns it. But anyhow, it was a fun deal. Of course, when the Slowpokes came to be, that became my race car. But anyhow, it was a fun time. And to learn to drive on that tractor, I was so small I couldn't reach any of the pedals. The clutch and the brake pedals, they were just out of reach. So my dad moved the seat as far forward as you could, and then being a carpenter, he fashioned wood blocks, and the wood blocks were then attached to the pedals on there. But still, to use a clutch pedal, I had to pretty much stand on one foot to depress the clutch pedal with the other. And so it was a trip. But my dad was real happy when I started driving the tractor, because doing chores on the farm was much easier doing tractor work with 2 people, because there was always, something to pull or haul or whatever, and I'd drive the tractor and my dad would supervise and help out. So it didn't take much time at all, and I'd be out there sun up to sundown running that tractor, because I just dearly loved driving that tractor. I would work sun up to sundown, and if I did really good on a day, my dad would never pay me, but if I did real good on a day, the following day I would be getting dressed to head out for the activities, and I would find his pocket change in my shoe, and that was cool, and I was happy with that. But then I don't know what changed that man so much, because my dad, in later years, he would come to my house and he would see my boys. First thing he would do is pull out his wallet, say, "What's Dad, Grandpa got in here for these boys?" My phone's ringing again. It always rings when I'm making these. But anyhow, he would give those boys $5 bills. Same guy that would slip me his pocket change. But anyhow, I dearly love that man. But anyhow, like I said, on our farm, the biggest crop was grapes, boy, and we had grapes like you wouldn't believe. And there was also, I did a lot of mischief, like way out in the back of our farm. We had a section of that farm was sandy loam soil, really soft stuff, and it was perfect for growing vegetables. So that's where our own personal crops were grown. You know, corn, potatoes, carrots, onions, you name it. We grew it, and because we kind of lived off that farm. In fact, out there in that same area, out there, that became kind of my racetrack, kind of a miniature slowpokes track. But I had a track around it that we raced the tractor around as fast as it would go, and it was fun. And we used to do all kinds of things. Like we had a surfboard. That was made out of wood, just a piece of board, really big, wide board, and we'd hook that behind a tractor, and you could surf on it. Well, and we also had an old car hood. Turn it upside down, hook it on behind a tractor, and the kids would pile on. And if you fell off, you had to run really fast to get back on. And to the best of my knowledge, there wasn't ever anyone killed out there, but I guess it could have been. But anyhow, and one other little interesting thing, way back, my dad was working out there in that particular section of the farm one day, and he heard a jet coming over from Niagara Falls Air Force Base. No big deal there. But when it got almost directly over him, it went silent. He says, "What?" And my dad looked up, and there's the jet plane, and it was a T-33 trainer, and it was headed for Lake Ontario. He thought, how weird, you can't even hear it. And so he went back to work, and all of a sudden there was a pop. And he says, "What?" And he looked up, and here's a guy hanging in a parachute coming down. And he says, and this wasn't one of those square ones like you see today that they could steer all over the place. They could go wherever they wanted to go. But this was one of the big old jobs like they had in World War II sort of thing. You see them in the movies. Well, anyhow, it's looking bad for our tomato plants. Because this guy's coming down, he's directly over my dad. He's still way up there, but he's coming down. But then he started drifting towards town. It looks like he's going to go urban. But he kept on going. He went across Main Street, Youngstown Lockport Road out there, and he came down behind Ed's garage. Yeah, he had some bruises and scratches and stuff, but he was okay. So anyhow, and then of course the plane kept on going, but it was going down, and it made a really big hole in Milton's pasture. But it missed all the cows and stuff, so no harm, no foul. And but anyhow, that's kind of a look at our farm, and it was just a great thing for me. It had plenty of pheasants and rabbits, and in the wintertime it had muskrats for us boys to chase and try to capture. We were never very good at it, but anyhow, it was a good deal. And so anyhow, I'm going to kind of continue this story here a little bit longer, because I need to tell you a little bit about my friends, my really good friends, Paul and Jim Austin. I mean, we were such good friends. I remember for the longest time, now this isn't really true, but I used to tell people this all the time. For the longest time, I always thought Paul's name was Jesus Christ, and I thought Jim's name was God damn it. That's the worst things I'll say on here. But anyhow, because that's what I heard their father call him. He would come home from work, and we were boys of action. We were always into something. And when his dad would come home from work, he'd be looking around, and he'd shake his head, and he'd look at Paul, and he'd say, "God damn it," or "Jesus Christ," and then he'd look at Jim and say, "God damn it." But anyhow, those were my buddies, and so I'm going to continue on with this, and I'll go to the second chapter in the book, and I'll tell you I'm sitting here struggling to write about my friend Paul because I miss him. He was the first of our threesome to go. It's going to be hard for me to get through. He did not deserve to be the first to go. He did not drink or smoke. You just don't know when it's your time, and I guess it's best. Paul and I were really close friends for a lot of years. I was only 4 days older than Paul. How long were we friends? I used to ride my tricycle to his house, and it was not next door. But anyhow, I'm shedding a tear right now. But anyhow, we did almost everything together. You know, hide and seek, red light, green light, baseball, hunting, fishing. Oh, and later on, we even dated girls that were cousins. He married one of them. And there was many crazy times with cars. I won't tell you all of them, but there was quite a few. I remember one in particular. Paul was the first one of us guys to have a 55 Chevy. There was a lot of my friends had 55 Chevys, and they were all fast. But Paul's was exceptionally fast. It had been modified some, but anyhow, one day he was traveling on Lake Road at his usual speed, which is wide open, and there was a big bang. Well, out of reflex, he ducked, and he went to straighten up, and when he straightened up, he hit his head on the roof because the hood had caved the roof in when it came off. And he looked in the hood, sure enough, the hood was gone. He looked back, and there it was floating down over the power wires. That was a close call. And in fact, that was close to where I went with Clyde 80 some miles an hour backwards. Well, anyhow, that's a different story. And there was a time, I remember one time he came to the farm, and he had his mother's, I think it was a 51 or 52 Chevy, one of them old fastback, streamlined looking jobs. Anyhow, he backed it into our garage, and it was the floor of the garage was just gravel. And when he came out of that garage, he was going wide open. I mean, there was sand and dirt and stones flying in all directions. But anyhow, it was a sight to see. And anyhow, some of the mischief we did. And early on, both Paul and Jim, they were living above Johnson's restaurant before their home was built. And when they were living there, Paul used to swipe cool cigarettes, smokes, from the restaurant. And then we would go out to the woods out by the chicken farm, and we'd smoke cigarettes. So that meant we were cool. And it was, and then I don't remember Paul smoking at all after we got to be teenagers. And myself, I didn't start smoking until I was a senior in high school. And I still remember it because I was at rehearsal for our senior play, and during breaks in the play, because it was after hours, the girls used to go outside and smoke. Well, one day I got invited to go with them. Oh boy, this is pretty cool. So I went out there with them, and I had to smoke. And so it was real easy to start, and it was a bear to quit. And it's been 20-something years now since I had a smoke. And so anyhow, that's kind of the story about Paul. There's a bunch in here about when we were hunting and fishing and all that kind of stuff. But then one day there was bad news. This is going to be hard for me. It was the fall of 2013. 2013. I was packing my gear to go to travel to Spain to do a pilgrimage at the Camino de Santiago. And I got a phone call. And the phone call was from Jim, his brother, Paul's brother. And Jim told me that Paul got the big C diagnosis. I was fully prepared at that point to cancel my trip to Spain, but Jim said no, he was doing good. And I said, well, if I do go to Spain, I said, I will be up there as soon as I return from Spain. And he says, that sounds like it should work. So when I got to Spain on this pilgrimage, one of the things you do is you carry with you a stone from your home country. And on that stone, you put your life burdens on there. And when you reach the Cruz de Ferro, which is the cross of iron, you leave your stone and your burdens behind. Well, this pilgrimage has been going on since the year 600. And because the pilgrimage takes you you start out in Spain and you walk all the way across northern Spain. I mean, it starts out in France and you just walk all the way across northern Spain to Santiago, and that's where St. James's body is buried. Well, I had this stone I had a stone for myself, and I had a stone for my youngest son. Who lost 2 children at childbirth. And so I also carried a stone that I had written on there, Lake Ontario. And it was from my friend Paul. And I left them behind at the Cruz de Ferro, the Cross of Iron. And upon my return from Spain, I repacked my gear, and 2 days later, I was in Ransomville to visit my friend. One of the hardest things I ever did. But anyhow, it's hard to be upbeat for your friend when you know the Grim Reaper is right outside the door. So, I also didn't mention I became totally unglued at the Cruz de Ferro. I'm going to have to decide if I'm going to publish this or not. But anyhow, we had a great meeting. Paul and I talking about old times and old girlfriends, all that sort of stuff. And I was getting ready to leave, and he asked me to come the following spring to go salmon fishing with him. And anyhow, Jim took me to the airport, and it was a long ride back to Corpus Christi that day. And that evening, I got to Corpus Christi, and I got another phone call from Jim. And he said, Paul took a turn, and the next morning, he was gone. So, I ended this chapter by saying, I miss you, Hound Dog. Surely do. Anyhow, if you can see it very well at all, here's a picture of the 3 of us the day before he died. That's Jim, that's me, that's Paul. That was November 11th, 2013. So, Hound Dog, no matter where you go, there you are. Bye.